In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, India looks to take advantage of the trade war between the U.S. and China. The country easing its foreign investment rules, a potentially big win for companies like Apple. Plus, Facebook gets ready for 2020. It updates its rules for political ads, but will it be enough to make a difference? And North Carolina's fight against vaping. The state expands its efforts to halt e-cigarette sales to teens. I talked to North Carolina's Attorney General. First, to our top story. Remember Friday when President Trump, quote, hereby ordered U.S. companies out of China? Well, if India gets its way, it may soon welcome Apple with much more open arms. The Indian government eased foreign investment rules in a number of sectors, including manufacturing and retail, a move that officials hope will further attract companies like Apple. The iPhone maker is already poised to soon start online sales in India within months, and Apple and its main production partner Foxconn have been busy laying the groundwork for some manufacturing in India. To discuss, in Los Angeles, we've got Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who covers Apple for us, and in New York, Techonomy founder David Kirkpatrick. So, Mark, first of all, tell us exactly what India is doing here and what it might mean for a company like Apple.
Right, so there have been plenty of reasons why Apple has not been very successful in India, with some stats having them at under 1 or 2% phone market share. And one of those reasons because they've had a hard time bypassing a lot of laws from the Indian government, which required, in order for companies to set up shop there, to produce a certain amount of its products locally in India. And for a company with its vast supply chain elsewhere in the world, doing that is both a difficult and an expensive process. And so what this law is going to do is it's going to allow Apple to work around that, and which would allow them to eventually, like you said, open up an online store and their own physical retail stores in India, which would allow them to have a much deeper push into the region.
Obviously, David, we're in the middle of an incredibly intense U.S.-China trade war, escalating, it seems, on both sides, which India could potentially use to its advantage. You know, how do you think India could potentially really benefit here?
Well, you know, India has had very restrictive trade barriers for many years that have slowly, there was a big drop in them a couple decades ago, but they still have had more restrictions than many other countries that are major trade partners of the United States. So this is clearly an example of them recognizing that they can take advantage of the moment and also serve their consumers, because look, Apple products are popular globally, and they have not done well in India, and I think this is a win for all concerned. Certainly, it'll be great for Apple and other companies that are shipping into India, but the Indian consumer has pretty much not bought iPhones at all up to now, so this is a big deal for them.
Meantime, Mark, in another story, Apple has apologized for its handling of Siri audio recordings, saying that they didn't live up to their own high standards in a story involving human contractors listening to our conversations with Siri, not unlike what Amazon has been doing with Alexa, what Google has been doing with Google Assistant, what Facebook has been doing with Messenger. Tell us a little bit more about what Apple had to say.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't completely a problem they were doing this. The issue, in my opinion, was that they were doing this while proclaiming that, you know, every other technology company in the Silicon Valley is bad and Apple's the only one that does the right thing. When the truth of the matter is they've been doing this. They were never transparent about this until today. I believe you have to go about 60 pages into a security white paper, as it's called, that nobody reads, to find out that Apple listens to recordings. So to answer your question, the changes made today are they're taking a pause on listening in. They're going to only use Apple contractors to listen to Siri recordings, which is about 0.2% of all recordings. And they're going to come out with software updates in the fall, presumably after iOS 13, that will allow people to either opt in or opt out from having select recordings listened to.
All right, now stand by, David Kirkpatrick. You're going to be sticking with me, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. Thank you so much. We've actually got breaking news now out of Washington. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin sat down with Bloomberg News for a wide-ranging interview. And as part of that conversation, Secretary Mnuchin said that, quote, if the conditions are right, then I would anticipate we'll take advantage of long-term borrowing and execute on that. For more, I want to get to Washington and Bloomberg's Alex Wayne. So, Alex, talk to us a little bit about what the Treasury Secretary had to say about bonds, ultra-long bonds, and the approach they would take.
There's been a lot of speculation in recent years about the prospect of the U.S. issuing ultra long-term bonds. These would be bonds that would be good for 50 or even 100 years. The U.S. government has looked at the idea a couple of times in the past, including in 2017 when Steven Mnuchin looked at it himself, but it's always been tabled. There's never been much market demand for Treasury bills of that length. But with interest rates as falling as precipitously as they have recently for 30-year Treasuries and shorter-term Treasuries, it looks like the Treasury Department is once again considering the idea very seriously, as he says, of issuing extremely long-term debt.
So how much does this have to do with concerns about a recession, given the recent inversion in the yield curve amidst an escalating trade war between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, he dismissed the idea that the yield curve inversion signals a recession, which you would expect him to do. He's part of the Trump administration, and they certainly don't want to deal with a recession headed into an election year. This probably has more to do with figuring out innovative ways to pay for a yawning budget deficit. The deficit's expected to exceed $1 trillion again this year, and they need to issue more debt to cover that gap. Long-term bonds would be a way to do that.
Meantime, let's talk a little bit about what he said about the dollar and whether or not the U.S. would intervene when it comes to currency issues. Certainly, the president has accused China of currency manipulation, given the action that they've taken with respect to the yuan. What will we do here in the United States?
He has said that we are not considering an intervention at this time. So right now, it doesn't seem to be on the table.
And lastly, let's talk about China. We've got potential trade talks coming up next week. Are they happening?
We have no indication the Chinese plan to come to Washington next week to resume trade talks. As far as we know, talks are dead for the moment because of this recent escalation between the president of the United States and China, who have raised tariffs on each other's goods just in the past 2 weeks.
Okay, Bloomberg's Alex Wayne, thank you so much for that update regarding comments made by U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin in a wide-ranging interview with Bloomberg. We're going to continue to bring you headlines from that interview as we have them. All right, coming up, Facebook has already deployed an election war room when it came to Brazil. Now it's adding another layer of protection in hopes of keeping next year's U.S. elections safe from harm. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Facebook is making changes to political advertising ahead of the 2020 U.S. presidential elections. The social network is tightening how it verifies who is behind political ads as it tries to clamp down on online misinformation, saying in a blog post, quote, people should know who is trying to influence their vote, and advertisers shouldn't be able to cover up who is paying for ads. While our efforts to protect elections are ongoing and won't be perfect, they will make it harder for advertisers to obscure who's behind the ads and will provide greater transparency for people. To discuss in the studio, we've got Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who of course covers Facebook for us, and in New York, Techonomy's David Kirkpatrick, who wrote the book on Facebook. So, Kurt, first of all, Facebook has been making small changes to political ads over the last couple of years, given what happened in the 2016 presidential election. So how is this different?
This is more of the same. So what we saw last year was they came out and they did two things. One, they said we need to verify who you are as an advertiser. We want to make sure that you are a legitimate political advertiser who is registered and not just a Russian troll. In this case, that was what happened in 2016. They also made a database and they said, all right, you can be able to go in there and search for all of these ads and see who paid for what. This is an extension of that on the verification side. They want to make sure that they're actually getting ads from people who are registered political advertisers and not potentially foreign agents. And so they're asking for even more information to verify who those people are.
David, you famously interviewed Mark Zuckerberg the day after the 2016 election and asked if fake news or misinformation on Facebook impacted the election, and he told you that was a crazy idea. Now, almost 3 years later, certainly there's been a 180, but do you think Facebook's actually going to be ready for 2020?
I worry. I must say, I really worry. I think that statement that Zuckerberg made right after the election and pretty much every action they've taken since then, in one way or another, underscores how fundamentally naive the company has been and more or less continues to be. I mean, this change is obviously a good one to require more disclosure, more checking of whether the political advertiser really is who they say they are. But why couldn't they have thought of that before? Why did they need to fail the first time they looked for transparency in the ads and now tighten the screws? They should really have stepped back a long time ago, even probably before the 2016 election, and thought about how their system would be abused, because now we're paying the price for the fact they didn't do that, and they're trying to backfill, and really it's extremely difficult.
So, Kurt, I've been inside Facebook's election war room, as it's called. They've had this now in place for several different elections around the world. What else have they done? And what of those things will really make a difference? Especially given that the real threat, they may not even know.
Yeah, I mean, they keep using the arms race kind of thing. They say, hey, we're taking 2 steps forward, but so are the bad guys, right? And so the two big things we've seen, obviously, on the ads front has been the one we just talked about. You mentioned the war room. This is something else that they plan to kind of pop up along the way for different elections globally, not just in the U.S., where they basically bring everyone into one room so that they can better monitor things like fake news or fake stories that might be spreading. That is a hard thing to do, to manually keep up with the spread of something on a platform with more than 2 billion people. And so I think they're going to continue to do those kinds of things. Like, they haven't announced a lot beyond those as their main initiatives, a lot of smaller things within that. But I think they do plan to, basically try to fight this with their employees in real time.
David, and this has gotten a little bit less attention, but Facebook has been adding more humans to its sort of editorial staff to decide what goes up, what stays up, what comes down. As somebody who has A, covered Facebook, but B, been a journalist for many, many years, do you think this is simply what Facebook has to do? And is it a failure of AI and technology?
Well, there's no question the only way Facebook or any of these platforms can really make serious progress is through a combination of algorithms and people looking at this stuff in every possible way and continuing to upgrade the way they do it, because the people that do things and to deceive are getting better and better also. But I think what people need to remember is that Facebook is the primary place in which politicking happens in almost every country. So they can have war rooms in the US or Brazil or India or the EU, and that's good. But until they really have some way to do this on a global scale in scores of languages, dealing with all these different cultural issues. I mean, elections happen every day, and they are being abused in almost every day on Facebook in all kinds of languages and all kinds of places. And that is a deeply challenging problem for this company to deal with.
Kurt, meantime, as Facebook seems to be battling regulators in different countries on all fronts, preparing for this election, they've also got this Libra thing that they announced, and now you've got lawmakers preparing legislation to effectively kill it. You've got the head of the SEC expressing extreme skepticism about it. How is the fight against Libra shaping up, and how will that play out as Facebook works through this election?
Yeah, I mean, there's been two kind of storylines in just the last week. One is the SEC thing you mentioned, which is kind of it's been ongoing, but it's really the idea that Facebook doesn't want to be viewed as a security. It doesn't want to be regulated in that way. And so there's kind of a debate where Facebook's Libra should fall. That's one. The second is that Facebook has 28 partners, or 27, I believe, with them on this, none of whom have really said anything over the last few months. And so they're now asking those people, would you please speak up and support this thing? And those are the issues. I mean, those are the issues that Facebook is fighting right now just to get this off the ground. And so it seems like it's going to be a long road for them, for sure.
David, what's your take on this whole Libra thing?
Well, first of all, I think they probably shouldn't have announced it when they did. They have way too many other problems, PR and real, to deal with. This is not the time for them to be trying something so fundamentally new, so landscape altering, when they still haven't addressed other issues like the one we were just discussing before. On the other hand, the problem they say they're trying to address, which is in particular to help with remittances, which is one of the biggest sources of money flows in the world, people who work outside of their home country sending money back, they have huge fees they have to pay to do that. It would be a major service to the world economy if they could really address that. And so in that sense, I love the idea they're trying to solve, the problem they're trying to solve with this, and that they're doing it this creative way. I think the timing was wrong, and it's very telling, as Kurt points out, that their many partners don't seem to be willing or able to defend this. Even, maybe they aren't even really partners. Who knows? This is a very opaque thing. It's not rolled out effectively so far at all.
All right, David Kirkpatrick, founder of Techonomy. More to discuss with you. Stay with me and our very own Kurt Wagner. Thanks, Kurt, for stopping by. Coming up, a new YouTube for kids. That is, after mounting criticism, the streaming giant is taking a new approach to kids' content. That's next. This is Bloomberg. After plenty of criticism over how YouTube has let inappropriate and sometimes violent content appear in front of children, the video streaming platform has announced it will build a separate website for kids' content. The new site, an online version of the YouTube Kids mobile app, will go live later this week. To discuss in Washington, Bloomberg Tech's Garrett DeVink, who covers Alphabet for us and still with us in New York, Techonomy founder David Kirkpatrick. Honestly, Garrett, it's almost surprising this didn't happen before, given that they've already got the YouTube Kids app separate from YouTube, right?
I mean, I have to admit, Emily, I had the exact same thought. It doesn't seem, technically like this is that complicated. The YouTube Kids app obviously was an app on iPads, iPhones. You could sort of turn it on, you could put it in front of your kid, and you could sort of trust that what they were going to be clicking through, searching, seeing wouldn't be inappropriate. But of course, a lot of children spend time in front of desktops. A lot of teenagers spend a lot of time in front of desktops, of course. And so I think this is just a way for people, similar to how your Netflix experience on desktop, you can click to the kids version just right there on the website. Now you'll be able to do it with YouTube as well.
David, obviously YouTube has been in the eye of the storm when it comes to this kids' content. They've reportedly, and as we've reported, settled with the FTC over violating the Children's Online Privacy Act. Why do you think YouTube has struggled so with how they handle kids' content?
Well, I think kids' content is kind of the canary in the coal mine, because if you really agree that some serious restraints and controls need to be imposed on that, then it's harder to argue that the same doesn't apply to content for adults. But, I think YouTube has had a very libertine, open attitude all along that unfortunately has played to its disadvantage. And at the moment, children's issues are getting more and more attention around the world when it comes to addiction, online content. And everyone can agree we've got to find ways to prevent our children's minds from being polluted and to prevent them from being manipulated by advertisers. It does just amaze me that YouTube, and to some extent Facebook as well, have taken so long to really get their arms around this. But it is good to see them taking steps like this now.
Now, meantime, Garrett, in the middle of all this controversy, Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, has sent a letter to creators in which she states that now it's more important than ever to allow anyone to upload any content that they want. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Susan's letter and if you look at the announcement today about YouTube Kids, it's very clear what Google's strategy is here, right? They say we will make one product for kids that is safe, that's vetted, that has a higher level of scrutiny, and the core product will remain what it's always been, which is a relatively open and free platform where things can get posted without being vetted and scrutinized before they actually go up and get into the real world. And that's a line that Google is, increasingly saying, look, we're not going to move further on this. Of course, they've hired thousands of people to sort of respond to flagged posts, take down content that does violate their policies. Obviously, violent content around terrorism and those kinds of things are not allowed on the platform, but you can still upload them, and often these things do get past the algorithms that are supposed to stop them from going up.
Now, David, a quote from this letter from Susan Wojcicki: bad actors will try to exploit platforms for their own gain, even as we invest in the systems to stop them. As more issues come into view, a rising chorus of policymakers, press, and pundits are questioning whether an open platform is valuable or even viable. Despite these concerns, I believe preserving an open platform is more important than ever. And yet, that is, in a way, fundamentally at odds with what they're trying to do with YouTube Kids. How does YouTube continue to operate with these values in place, but also remain safe?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think the answer is going to be found until somehow government and the platforms figure out ways to work together, which we're still pretty far from achieving. I mean, the letter on its face is very reasonable and all sounds great and can't really be argued with, except that it implicit in it, the whole presumption is that we just let us handle this. We can do it. We know how to do it. We're going to do it responsibly. Don't regulate us. But the reality is there's something fundamentally wrong with a private company making the unilateral determination about what is and is not allowed in what is essentially a town square for the planet. And I think these arguments, again, apply both to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter as well. But those companies are just desperately fighting that battle, and they're trying to say everything they can, but that's not going to be the way it's going to be decided in the end. Government's going to come in.
Meantime, Garrett, we still don't know the results of the FTC settlement with YouTube. Why has this been such a secret?
I mean, I don't know if they've even figured out exactly what it's going to look like at the end of the day. And obviously, it's a secret because both parties have an interest in kind of making sure it stays under wraps until everyone is ready to talk about it. I think, most people are expecting that to come relatively soon, so we will see what the impact there is. But of course, if you look at previous settlements between giant tech companies and governments, whether it's in Europe or here in the United States, often there's a fine involved, sometimes a historically unprecedentedly large fine, and yet these big tech companies are so big and so profitable that they just sort of move right past it, and it's unlikely to have a real material impact on how these companies do business.
All right, well, we'll continue to follow. Bloomberg's Garrett DeVink and Techonomy's David Kirkpatrick. Thank you both. Still to come, reading the smoke signals, we're going to speak to one U.S. state's top legal officer and a scientist about why they're concerned about e-cigarettes. This is Bloomberg. More breaking news now. We're continuing to get highlights from U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin's interview with Bloomberg News. Alex Wayne is back with us from Washington. And Alex, earlier you told us that Mnuchin said that ultra-long U.S. bonds is, quote, under very serious consideration. And as part of that conversation, he also talked about the dollar, saying no intention of intervention at this time. Situations could change in the future, but right now we are not contemplating an intervention. Please expand for us.
Yeah, I had to be a little cagey about it earlier, but he said today something he said in the past, actually, that they're not looking at an intervention in dollar markets right now. The backstory on this is that the president is incredibly frustrated about the strong dollar. It really helps. It really hampers all of his trade policies. A strong dollar means that American manufacturers have trouble selling their exports because prices are so high for foreign buyers, and meanwhile, U.S. consumers can buy more imports because they've got such a strong currency. And so that just has the effect of widening trade deficits that the president has vowed to close. So there's been a lot of speculation that the president may order an intervention by Treasury into U.S. currency markets. This would be fairly unprecedented for the president to do this just to combat a strong dollar. The country has intervened in the dollar market before for episodes like a tsunami in 2011 in Japan that weakened the yen. But this would be a strange occurrence. There have been discussions about it in the White House. There have been discussions about it at Treasury. But as Mnuchin said today, they are not considering it at this time.
Well, and I wonder how much of that discussion involves, well, what's China doing with its currency?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should focus on the words "at this time." This could change any moment. The president could tweet, and all of a sudden, the U.S. is pursuing an intervention. And the secretary indicated in his interview that they've done some preparations for this. He talked about how he thinks it would be more effective if the U.S. intervened in conjunction with both the Federal Reserve and allies, rather than trying to sell a bunch of dollars on its own, which would have very little impact in a $5 trillion daily currency market.
Okay, Bloomberg's Alex Wayne for us in Washington, continuing to digest those headlines out of this wide-ranging interview that Bloomberg conducted with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. Alex, will stay tuned for more details. Thank you. Meantime, vaping is back in the spotlight as two of the world's biggest tobacco companies, Philip Morris and Altria, start talks to reunite. A reunification would combine two of the most popular alternative smoking products, IQOS and Juul. But alternative may not mean safer. North Carolina was the first U.S. state to sue Juul back in May for targeting children and misrepresenting the dangers of its products. Now the state's Attorney General, Josh Stein, is taking on another 8 e-cigarette companies. I spoke with Attorney General Stein a short time ago.
I'm concerned that these companies are targeting children. They have designed their product. They use flavors that appeal to children. They market on channels, social media channels that children frequent. They use advertising to appeal to children. And the ones that I sued yesterday either have no age verification or wholly inadequate age verification on their website, which is against the law in North Carolina. And so I am making these allegations against these companies because I care deeply about the health of North Carolina teenagers.
Now, many of these companies are saying they are giving adult cigarette smokers a safer alternative. If they take products off store shelves, as you want them to do, is that depriving adults of a potentially safer alternative?
What I want them to do is to stop marketing and selling to kids. When you ask kids, and there's survey data to show this, why do you do this? Two things. One is they love the flavors. And two, a lot of them think it's not dangerous to them. So if these guys will market their product without these flavors that are clearly targeted to children, I'm talking about Gummy Bear, Fruit Loops, Graham Crackers, Unicorn. They're in their packaging, they do them in juice boxes with an actual straw to demonstrate, to replicate a juice box. They're on Snapchat and Instagram. There was one ad by Eon Smoke, one of the companies I sued yesterday. And by the way, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey sued them today. But they had an advertisement on Instagram of their device, which looks like a USB port, and it says, "No, Mom, it's a USB port." Did they do that to appeal to me? Did they do it to appeal to you? They did it to appeal to children. And that is, it's immoral, it's wrong, and it's illegal in North Carolina, which is why I am going to court.
So Juul has taken most of its flavored products off physical shelves. You can only get most of them online. Is that enough?
No, they still sell mint in the stores, and mint is very popular. A buddy of mine who's got a 9th grader was just telling me, school started in North Carolina this week. He said the rage, what's cool is Jewel Mango. That's the flavor. These kids can get their hands on these flavors as long as they're being manufactured and sold. Traditional tobacco products, cigarettes, you cannot buy a mango flavored cigarette. You can only buy tobacco or menthol. And that's exactly what these e-cigarette manufacturers need to do. Otherwise, they are going to create an entire new generation of people addicted to nicotine, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
Do you think the FDA is doing enough?
No. I think the FDA has the right intention. I think they care about this. The commissioner has declared this an epidemic, a youth epidemic. So they have the right orientation, but they need to do more. They need to ban these flavors. They need to get pre-approval on all of these products before they can hit the shelves. They need to set a standard on how much nicotine. One of the companies I sued yesterday, the amount of nicotine in their pod is twice what a Juul pod is, which is more than what a person gets smoking a pack of cigarettes. The amount of nicotine is outrageous, and the teenage brain is highly susceptible to addiction. The FDA should ban these products when they are not targeted to adults. If an adult wants to buy it, if they want to buy a tobacco flavor, menthol flavor, I got no problem. That's their right, and if it helps them get off cigarettes, fine. But what's happening is children are the ones buying a large number of these products.
Do you expect other attorney generals to join in on your suits?
I will not be surprised. I've heard from a number of attorneys general who are very concerned because they're seeing it in their communities just as I'm seeing it in North Carolina schools.
Meantime, you've got Philip Morris in talks to reunite with Altria, which of course has a huge stake in Juul. This would be big tobacco having ownership over the largest vaping company in the world. What's your take on that?
Well, I care less about what corporate form any of these conglomerates take than I do about the business practices that are engaged. And what I want is for companies to stop designing their products, packaging their products, marketing their products, and selling their products to children.
And just to clarify, the 8 additional companies that you've sued in addition to Juul, how did you choose these companies specifically?
Well, we did a lot of research. We actually had some people do some purchases, and we thought they were extremely bad actors. That's what we allege in our complaint. And my objective is to try to protect young people in North Carolina from these products, which are extremely harmful and addictive. And these were bad actors in my view.
That was North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein speaking with me earlier. It is important to note that Juul issued the following statement back in May. Juul shares the Attorney General's concerns about youth vaping, which is why we have been cooperating with his office and why we have taken the most aggressive actions of anyone in the industry to combat youth usage. For more on concerns about vaping products, I want to bring in Professor Robert Turan of the North Carolina School of Medicine. Professor Turan and his colleagues published a report earlier this month which finds vaping may not be safer than smoking cigarettes. Also in Washington, D.C., we've got our Bloomberg News healthcare policy reporter, Anna Edney. So before we get to the science of this, Anna, there's a lot of competing dynamics here. You've got lawsuits from the Attorney General of North Carolina. You've got corporate potential deals being made in the big tobacco and e-cigarette space. You've got new science coming out on this topic weekly. What do you expect to happen with this lawsuit? How impactful could it be?
Well, I think it's it's interesting that the Attorney General filed this lawsuit while at the same time the Food and Drug Administration is looking at a lot of these issues that he's raised, particularly the flavors that are out there that kids are able to get a hold of in stores, it seems, even though that's illegal. And so I think, what's going to happen is one way or another, it seems that these flavors will be restricted, whether that comes from attorneys general filing lawsuits or whether that comes from FDA actions, which should be becoming final pretty soon. They had proposed limiting flavored e-cigarette products to just certain stores where there was a separate barrier for adults to go buy them. So this wouldn't be your regular convenience store or gas store where they're available now. And so it seems like the outcome one way or another will be that flavors will be restricted in some way.
So, Professor Turan, let's talk about the science and the conclusions of your study, which is absolutely fascinating. It all boils down to one question. Are e-cigarettes safer than regular cigarettes or not? What's your answer?
So from the lungs perspective, they are not. All my research has told me.
Why? Why do you believe they're not safer?
So that's a good question. So we've been studying proteases. So proteases are like molecular scissors that cut up other proteins. They're normally present in the lung, they're part of normal lung function. But when you get disease, proteases go up, often before you can detect disease. So when you get emphysema, it's high levels of proteases in the lung after smoking that then chew up the lung and cause the emphysema and the lung disease. So we measured proteases as a biomarker of harm, if you will, and we found that these proteases were up at the same level in smokers as in vapors, which means that vapors, if they can keep vaping over 20, 30 years, will be at risk of getting COPD just the same as smokers.
And here's a quote from your study. You say, elevated levels of protease enzymes have been linked to emphysema in smokers. These increased enzymes have now been documented in people who use e-cigarettes. Okay, but if you had a choice between regular cigarettes and e-cigarettes, which would you choose? Are e-cigarettes at all a healthier or safer alternative?
From what we've looked at in the lung, no, they're no safer at all.
What about in terms of the long-term impacts? I mean, obviously, vaping has been around in a limited form for some time, but don't we need more time to draw an official conclusion or perhaps a bigger sample size?
On one regard, that's possibly true. We do need to replicate this study in a bigger sample, and that's something we've got money from the National Cancer Institute to do that. So that's going to happen starting next year. We do need to replicate, but I mean, really, to know whether vaping truly causes the same lung disease as smoking, you're going to have to wait 30 years. And frankly, especially when there's young kids vaping, I'd rather not take the risk. So I mean, all the data is very strong. There is a very strong association between lung disease and protease levels. And vaping increases proteases, so people are at risk of getting lung disease.
Anna, how is the FDA and how are the e-cigarette companies reacting to the results of this study?
This paper only just came out last week, so I haven't talked to any e-cigarette companies or the FDA. The NIH is aware of it, and they're very interested, and they're monitoring the situation.
Anna Edney, how, as far as you understand it, is the industry reacting?
Well, I know that that Juul is doing their own studies on a lot of these things. They have to submit an application to the FDA next year by May to get essentially approval to market their products, to keep them on the market. And so they're looking at a lot of this because they have to weigh the risk and the benefit, and they have to prove to the FDA that these products are more beneficial than they are harmful. And so I think we'll see some of their research, which I imagine will attempt to contradict some of this coming out over several months and be included in what they send to the Food and Drug Administration.
All right, more to come. Anna Edney reporting on e-cigarettes for Bloomberg, along with North Carolina School of Medicine Professor Robert Turan, out with a really important study. Thank you so much, Professor Turan, for joining us. Coming up, Fitbit is pushing beyond hardware and into services. Co-founder and CEO James Park tells us how a new subscription model will help the company take on competition from Apple and Samsung next. The U.S. Justice Department is opposing a bid by Google, Facebook, and a Chinese entity to complete an undersea internet cable between the United States and Hong Kong. The high-capacity fiber optic cable running 8,000 miles along the seafloor is intended to bring faster connections for investors on both sides of the Pacific. So far, construction has been conducted under a temporary permit that is due to expire in September. The DOJ has signaled opposition to the project because of concerns over its Chinese investor, Dr. Peng Telecom and Media Group, which has listed Huawei as a partner. Huawei has denied the allegations. Fitbit has struggled to compete in the smartwatch market against bigger companies like Apple. Shares are down 85% since its IPO price in 2015. Now, the wearables company is shifting its business model with a new subscription service called Fitbit Premium. That is part of a new fall fitness lineup announced today. Business Week television and radio hosts Carol Masser and Jason Kelly spoke with Fitbit CEO and co-founder James Park about this new services push. Take a listen.
We have a lot of exciting announcements today across software and service and also devices as well. And it's all in support of our company's mission, which is to make everyone in the world healthier, and in particular to make health accessible to everybody. That's really important for us. And at the same time, we're also in the middle of transforming our company from being a purely devices company to, again, being more of a services and device company with more predictable recurring revenue streams. And Premium is a really important step in that transformation. So what we announced today is a all-in-one comprehensive health service that takes data right from your wrist and turns it into actionable and personalized guidance and coaching that helps you get more active, eat better, and sleep better. It has programs, insights, content, coaching, motivation in the form of health games, a health report that you can take to your doctor.
So it's no longer just about, hey, you took this many steps. It's like, okay, you did this, so hey, here's something else
Absolutely.
you should know.
It's what's beyond the metrics, it's what's beyond the data. So how do we actually coach you and guide you to the next step? And that's incredibly important. That's what we've been hearing that our users want next from Fitbit.
Well, tell us more about that, because clearly this is a response to the market. What did you specifically see? What did you specifically hear from your previous products that sort of got you to this?
Well, it's not so much from the market, but it's really from our customers, because we collect a lot of data from our users. We also see, how well they're doing, how much weight they're losing, how much sleep that we're getting, and we felt that focusing more on the software and services aspect of health was really the next step in getting our users to become healthier. I think we had taken to the limit what we could do with just giving people metrics, and they really needed to understand what to do with that data.
Fitbit co-founder and CEO there, James Park. Still ahead, hundreds of local police forces are turning to Ring's smart doorbells to fight crime. How this could affect the privacy of the homeowners. Next, this is Bloomberg. Amazon-owned doorbell company Ring has partnered with more than 400 police forces across the U.S., giving them access to millions of homeowners' cameras. This according to a new report from the Washington Post. The partnerships allow police to request video recordings within a specific time and geographic location, while Ring gives homeowners the option to decline requests. Privacy advocates have raised concerns about the program's potential risks. Joining us from Seattle to discuss, Bloomberg's Matt Day, who covers Amazon. So, Matt, how exactly will this program work?
So it works through an app that Ring released last year called Neighbors, right, where you can kind of opt into a sort of next door Facebook local group style community where you can share your footage, report suspicious people or interesting stuff, and if the police come knocking, share your footage with them if you choose to. It's kind of creating, again, what critics call a little bit of a dragnet in terms of, your doorbells potentially spying at will on the community.
Right. It certainly sounds like it could become a little Big Brother. I mean, what kind of protections are there in place?
Well, Ring says, all of this is opt-in. You're not streaming live to your neighbors or anything by default. You're certainly not handing that footage over to the police. And Ring did say that, they're not going to sort of lower their standards for turning over footage to the police. They want, sort of valid court documents anytime somebody comes calling looking for a specific doorbell's footage. So sort of their guardrails that Ring is setting up around this is that, at least right now, everything is opt-in in terms of this program with police.
How does this fit into Amazon's facial recognition technology and the controversy around that? I mean, they're sort of like two sides of the same coin.
A little bit, and this was in the news recently when Ring was granted a patent for something that looks an awful lot like applying a facial recognition software behind the scenes of their doorbells, right, to be able to try to identify who's at the door in some kind of a database. Now that's not in place now, and there is no sort of formal relationship between Ring and the Amazon Web Services facial recognition product. That's been pretty controversial, but people, especially civil liberties groups who have been critical of the rollout of smart doorbell cameras, are looking at sort of those patent applications and these related businesses under the Amazon umbrella and suggested that this could be where this technology goes in the future.
How have police departments used Ring video so far? I imagine it's been fairly useful in certain cases.
Oh yeah, and there's a wide range of applications, from catching or deterring, porch pirates who are stealing e-commerce packages to, say there's a fire across the street or some kind of violent episode out on the sidewalk. Having extra eyes on the street is something that I don't think many police departments would turn down. I think just the question is, and particularly as civil liberties groups have started looking at this, is sort of what is the community weigh in on this, and what is sort of the opportunity for people to have their voices heard, because at least until now, a lot of these deals were negotiated in secret, and it was sort of the work of journalists and civil liberties groups to say, oh hey, what kind of relationship is there between Ring and police departments in my town.
And lastly, Ring has sort of gotten a lot of attention for not being content being just a doorbell company. What are the real ambitions of this company and of Amazon in this space?
Certainly in their marketing, Amazon Ring has said that they want to sell safety, right? They've said we are a safety company. We believe in making neighborhoods around the country safer. That's core to their pitch. So that's why I think they didn't stop at just being another doorbell maker and release this Neighbors app and these partnerships with police to try to fulfill that. For Amazon, it's just another stake in the ground in their smart home play, right? They'd like to be in your living room, at your front doorbell, running your Wi-Fi after a recent acquisition. They want to be kind of everywhere in and around the home, and this is one of their bigger acquisitions to date toward that mission.
All right, Bloomberg's Matt Day for us in Seattle, where he covers Amazon. Thank you so much for that report. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Do not miss our exclusive conversation with Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to ask him all the tough questions, and we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.